There is a financial principle in Malachi chapter 3 that is almost always buried beneath one word: tithe. Most people hear this passage and immediately think about 10%. They think about what must be given, what might be received, and whether the windows of heaven will open if the correct amount is placed in the correct envelope. But what if the most practical financial revelation in the passage is not about how much leaves your hand? What if it is about what stops disappearing after it arrives? God does not speak only about opening heaven. He also speaks about restraining the devourer. He describes a harvest that will no longer be consumed before it can be enjoyed, and fruit that will no longer fall before it becomes mature. That is not merely a promise of addition. It is a promise of preservation. And many people do not need another dramatic increase before their financial lives can begin to change. They need to discover what has been quietly eating the increase they have already received. More money enters, but nothing remains. Income rises, but peace does not. A new opportunity appears, but so does a new obligation. The account becomes larger, yet the anxiety follows it. Malachi 3 confronts this cycle by revealing that abundance is not only about receiving more, it is also about becoming capable of retaining, directing, and multiplying what has been entrusted to you. This is not a formula for instant wealth. Giving is not a payment that forces God to produce a financial return. Faith does not replace work, planning, wise counsel, or responsible decisions. The deeper principle is alignment. When your worship, stewardship, generosity, expectations, and daily choices begin moving in the same direction, the leaks become visible. The harvest receives protection. Money stops being a frightened master and becomes a purposeful servant. That is the principle most people miss. Malachi spoke to a people who had returned from exile but had not fully returned in heart. The temple existed again. Worship continued. Priests still performed their duties. The outward structure was present, but trust had become tired. The people had lived through national collapse, displacement, rebuilding, delayed hopes, and economic pressure. Over time, disappointment entered their relationship with God. Their offerings became careless. Their commitments weakened. Worship continued, but expectation had quietly died. This is important because Malachi 3 is often presented as though God suddenly interrupts the Bible to deliver a fundraising message. He does not. The chapter is part of a much larger confrontation about relationship. God is addressing people who still know the language of covenant while living as though the covenant no longer matters. His invitation is, in essence, return to me, and I will return to you. Only then does the conversation move toward the storehouse, the open heavens, and the protected harvest. The order reveals the principle. God is not trying to extract money from frightened people. He is restoring trust in people who have begun organizing life as though they are alone. That same drift can happen today without anyone consciously deciding to reject God. A season lasts longer than expected. A business fails. A prayer appears unanswered. Someone else receives the opportunity you wanted. Slowly, generosity begins to feel dangerous. Every decision is measured through fear. You still believe in God, but you no longer expect His faithfulness to enter the practical details of your life. You begin treating money as though it is the only protection you have. Malachi challenges that posture before it challenges any percentage. The first financial question in the chapter is not, how much are you giving? It is, whom are you trusting? The storehouse in Malachi had a real purpose. It held food and resources that supported worship, the priestly service, and the life of the covenant community. This was not an isolated private transaction between one individual and a divine payment system. Resources were brought into a shared structure so that the house would be supplied and the community could function as it was intended. That changes the emotional meaning of giving. Giving was not meant to purchase God's attention. It was participation in a world where people refused to live only for themselves. The storehouse represented shared responsibility. It said, "What has entered my hands is connected to a purpose larger than my immediate appetite." This is why generosity can expose the true condition of the heart. When fear is in control, every outgoing dollar feels like a threat. Even when a person has enough, the mind continues saying, "Hold tighter. Something may happen. No one will take care of you." Generosity interrupts that script. It does not require recklessness. It does not mean giving away rent money, ignoring debt, or responding to manipulative pressure. Healthy giving should be voluntary, thoughtful, and consistent with real responsibilities. But it does declare that fear will not become the final authority over your resources. An open hand says, "Money is useful, but it is not my God. It can pass through me without carrying my identity away with it." The storehouse principle is not that heaven can be bribed. It is that resources become powerful when they are connected to purpose. Most sermons pause at the windows of heaven. The image is unforgettable. Heaven opening and blessing being poured out beyond the capacity to contain it. But the next verse contains the part of the promise that may be even more financially practical. God says, "He will rebuke the devourer so that it will not destroy the fruit of the ground, and the vine will not lose its fruit before the proper time." In an agricultural economy, this was not poetic decoration. A farmer could plant faithfully, work through the season, and watch a promising harvest appear, only to lose it to insects, disease, weather, or premature failure. The problem was not always the absence of production. Sometimes the field produced, but the farmer could not keep what it produced. That is the financial pattern many people experience now. They are not entirely without income. They work, they receive, they may even earn more than they did 5 years ago. But something continually consumes the harvest. High-interest debt eats tomorrow's income before tomorrow arrives. Subscriptions and small recurring charges disappear beneath attention. Lifestyle expansion absorbs every raise. Poor contracts drain the value of good work. Neglected maintenance becomes an expensive emergency. Impulse purchases provide momentary relief and long-term pressure. Taxes are ignored until they become a crisis. Money is lent without boundaries and never returns. Fear keeps cash inactive when wise investment or business improvement is needed. There are also losses that no responsible person could have predicted. Illness, war, inflation, unemployment, family emergencies, and economic disruption. Not every financial difficulty is caused by bad stewardship, and hardship should never be used as evidence of spiritual failure. But Malachi invites an honest question. What is devouring the fruit in your field? You cannot protect what you refuse to examine. Financial progress has two movements. The first is inflow, what you earn, create, receive, or produce. The second is retention, what remains available for saving, investment, generosity, resilience, and future purpose. People often focus entirely on the first movement. They search for a larger salary, another client, a more profitable business, or a new source of income. Those goals may be wise. Increasing earning capacity can change a family's future. But if retention does not grow with inflow, the increase will disappear. A larger river cannot fill a container that has no bottom. This is where the promise about the devourer becomes a principle of stewardship. Before asking only, "How can I make more?" ask, "What repeatedly consumes what I make? Which expenses no longer serve my values? Where am I paying for delay, disorganization, or avoidance? Which decisions are being made to impress people rather than build a future? What financial risk have I refused to name? What part of my harvest is being lost because I never created a system to protect it?" This kind of examination is not fear-based. It is an act of respect for provision. If God entrusts something to your hands, attention is one way you honor it. Malachi contains one of Scripture's most striking invitations. Test me in this. This does not mean manipulating God with a payment and demanding a deadline. It is not permission to turn faith into a laboratory where every gift must produce a measurable financial reward. The invitation is relational. God is speaking to disappointed people whose trust has become theoretical. He invites them to step back into faithful practice and observe what happens when covenant is no longer treated as empty language. In other words, do not only debate generosity, practice it wisely. Do not only admire stewardship, build a system. Do not only say that God is your source, make decisions that are not controlled entirely by scarcity. Do not only pray for the harvest, protect the field. Faith becomes visible through repeated action. If you want to test the principle, begin with a period of deliberate alignment. Choose generosity before impulse. Create margin before lifestyle expansion. Address a financial leak before seeking another stream. Tell the truth about debt. Set aside resources for predictable costs. Ask for counsel before signing a decision you do not understand. Then observe not whether money falls from the sky, but whether your financial life begins becoming clearer, calmer, more purposeful, and more resilient. The first evidence of open heavens may not be a sudden deposit. It may be wisdom. People tend to recognize blessing only when something is added. A new client is blessing. A raise is blessing. A gift is blessing. An unexpected opportunity is blessing. But what about the expense that never became necessary because you acted early? What about the fraudulent agreement you noticed before signing? What about the purchase you delayed and later realized you did not need? What about the conversation that prevented a business partnership from collapsing? What about the discipline to build an emergency fund before the emergency came? What about the doctor, mechanic, accountant, lawyer, or advisor who saw a problem while it was still small? Protection is difficult to celebrate because it often leaves no dramatic evidence. You see what happened, but not what was prevented. Yet Malachi gives protection equal attention with overflow. God opens. God also restrains. He provides. He also preserves. He sends rain. He also protects the fruit until maturity. This expands the way you pray about finances. Do not ask only for more income. Ask for discernment. Ask for restraint. Ask to recognize bad timing. Ask for the courage to walk away from an impressive opportunity that carries hidden destruction. Ask for systems strong enough to hold what you are asking to receive. Sometimes, Abundance begins when the devourer loses access. It is tempting to describe every financial loss as a spiritual attack. That explanation can feel powerful because it gives the problem an enemy. But spiritual language should never become a way to avoid practical responsibility. Sometimes the devourer has a monthly due date. Sometimes it has an interest rate. Sometimes it is hidden in a contract. Sometimes it is the need to appear successful. Sometimes it is emotional spending after a painful day. Sometimes it is the absence of a budget. Sometimes it is a business that produces revenue but has never calculated real profit. Sometimes it is generosity without boundaries, where guilt makes every request feel like an obligation. Sometimes it is the refusal to learn because financial language feels intimidating. Naming these things does not make the message less spiritual. Truth is spiritual. Wisdom is spiritual. Discipline is spiritual when it protects what has been entrusted to you. Prayer should produce clarity, not replace it. You can rebuke fear and still review the statement. You can believe God for provision and still negotiate the contract. You can trust the future and still ensure what needs protection. You can be generous and still say no. Faith and financial competence belong in the same room. The story of Abraham and Melchizedek is often used in conversations about giving because Abraham offered a tenth before the law of Moses. But one detail is crucial. Abraham did not give in order to purchase victory. He gave after victory. The gift was a response to what had already been received, not a fee charged to make God act. That distinction protects generosity from manipulation. You do not give so that God will finally become good. You give because His goodness has already entered your story. You do not give to become accepted. You give from belonging. You do not give to force abundance. You give because abundance, in the deepest biblical sense, is already larger than possession. It includes grace, relationship, purpose, wisdom, and the freedom to become a blessing. Giving after victory creates gratitude. Giving to buy victory creates anxiety. One says, "Look what God has entrusted to me." The other says, "I hope this payment is enough to make God help me." Malachi should never be used to keep people frightened of a closed heaven. The passage is meant to awaken trust in a God who invites participation. The word abundance is easily confused with luxury, but a person can display wealth while possessing no margin, no peace, and no freedom. A larger house can carry a larger payment. A more expensive car can become another obligation. A successful image can hide a fragile financial life. Biblical abundance is better understood as capacity. Capacity to meet responsibilities. Capacity to survive disruption. Capacity to make decisions without panic. Capacity to give without endangering your household. Capacity to invest in work that creates value. Capacity to help when a real need appears. Capacity to say yes to purpose and no to pressure. This is why more than enough should never mean endless consumption. If every increase is absorbed by a higher standard of appearance, overflow never develops. The river enters and disappears. Abundance begins when there is enough margin for resources to move beyond you. You are not meant to become a stagnant reservoir, but neither can you become a river if every drop is consumed before it reaches the next person. Stewardship creates flow. Paul wrote that he had learned to be content in both abundance and need. Contentment gave him stability in changing conditions. It did not require him to call lack good or pretend practical needs did not exist. This distinction matters because disappointment sometimes disguises itself as spiritual maturity. A person once expected change. After repeated setbacks, they stop expecting anything and call it contentment. But contentment and resignation feel different. Contentment says, "My peace is not held hostage by today's number, and I will still take wise action." Resignation says, "Nothing will change, so there is no reason to act." Contentment can budget. Resignation avoids the account. Contentment can pursue new income without worshiping it. Resignation calls every ambition greed. Contentment can enjoy what is present. Resignation quietly resents it. The financial principle in Malachi does not require anxiety-driven striving. It invites steady expectation joined to responsible participation. You can be grateful today and still build for tomorrow. You can rest in God without becoming passive. You can desire growth without despising your current season. Many financial problems are not solved permanently by a single increase because the old identity follows the new income. If you see yourself as permanently behind, every unexpected expense confirms the story. If you believe money always leaves you, you may handle it with desperation when it arrives. If you believe wealthy people are automatically corrupt, you may sabotage growth to remain loyal to an unconscious moral identity. If you believe your value depends on visible success, you may spend tomorrow's resources to create today's impression. Kenyon repeatedly emphasized that believers must become conscious of who they are in Christ. Applied to finances, this does not mean imagining yourself rich while ignoring reality. It means refusing the identity of an orphan. An orphan mentality believes there will never be enough, no one will help, and everything must be seized immediately because tomorrow is unsafe. A covenant mentality can delay gratification. It can plan. It can learn. It can give. It can admit mistakes without being destroyed by shame. Identity does not replace arithmetic. It determines whether you can face arithmetic without fear. Say this honestly: I am not abandoned. I can learn what I was never taught. My current balance is information, not identity. I will not spend to prove my worth. I can protect today's harvest while preparing tomorrow's field. Money will serve purpose in my life. These statements do not create money by magic. They create a posture capable of making different decisions. If you want this passage to become practical, begin with 7 areas. First, examine the field. Write down every source of income and every regular obligation. Do not rely on memory. Clarity begins when the entire field becomes visible. Second, identify the devourers. Look for interest, unnecessary fees, unused subscriptions, emotional spending, poor pricing, unprofitable work, repeated penalties, lifestyle pressure, and costs created by delay. Third, restore the storehouse. Choose a deliberate amount for generosity and community purpose. The percentage may be part of your conviction, but the heart of the practice is consistency, freedom, and purpose, not fear. Fourth, build protection. Create margin for taxes, maintenance, medical needs, emergencies, and irregular expenses. A predictable cost should not repeatedly arrive as a surprise. Fifth, protect the vine from premature fruit. Do not consume every future gain before it matures. Allow savings, investments, skills, and business improvements time to grow. Sixth, ask for wisdom before increase. If income doubled tomorrow, what system would hold it? What debt would be addressed? What purpose would receive it? Decide before emotion decides for you. Seventh, Measure fruit by more than appearance. Track peace, resilience, generosity, reduced debt, available margin, and the ability to make better choices. Wealth that cannot be displayed may still be changing your future. For the next 7 days, practice the principle instead of merely admiring it. On day 1, review the last 30 days of transactions without condemnation. Your goal is truth, not shame. On day 2, cancel or reduce one recurring leak. On day 3, set aside a deliberate amount for generosity. Choose freely, not under pressure. On day 4, create one protective category: emergency savings, tax reserve, maintenance, insurance review, or debt reduction. On day 5, learn one financial concept you have avoided. Ask a qualified professional when the issue requires expertise. On day 6, delay one non-essential purchase for 48 hours and notice what emotion wanted it immediately. On day 7, pray over the whole picture. Give thanks for every resource already present, admit what needs correction, and ask for wisdom concerning the next season. The numbers may not transform in 7 days, but your relationship with the numbers can. And when fear loses control, wise action becomes much easier. What would an open heaven look like in ordinary financial life? It may look like an idea arriving at the right time, a skill becoming valuable, a conversation opening a new opportunity, a harmful agreement being exposed, a household learning to cooperate instead of accuse, a business discovering the difference between revenue and profit, a person receiving the courage to face debt, a raise that is not immediately consumed, a need being met through community, a generous act producing hope far beyond its monetary amount. Not every blessing is spectacular. Not every provision can be explained by one cause, and no faithful teacher should promise that giving guarantees wealth or protects a person from every hardship. But Malachi reveals a pattern worth trusting. Return, align, participate, protect, allow the harvest to mature. Let overflow become a blessing beyond you. The financial principle is not the 10% purchases in open heaven. It is that trust changes how you hold everything. When you stop treating God like an accountant and money like a savior, generosity becomes free. Stewardship becomes worship. Protection becomes part of provision. Increase gains a purpose. And the devourer, whatever form it has taken in your financial life, loses the unquestioned access it once possessed. So ask a better question. Not only, how much more can I receive? Ask, what can I faithfully retain, mature, direct, and release? That is how a harvest becomes a future. That is how provision becomes capacity. That is how blessing becomes witness. And that is the financial revelation in Malachi 3 that goes far deeper than tithing. If this message speaks to you, write one sentence in the comments. I will protect the harvest, close the leaks, and give my resources a purpose. Let that become more than a declaration. Let it become the beginning of a new financial pattern